A film is set in Iceland, where an American tourist bus is heading to one of the popular tourist destinations. Among the passengers is a couple named Jenai and Riley, who wake up when the guide announces they will arrive in about 30 minutes. Riley immediately grabs his vintage analog camera from his bag to prepare for taking photos of the scenery. Upon reaching the town, they stop at a guest house to drop off their belongings. Then, they head to a hot spring tourist spot. Riley starts photographing the fountain there before they both bathe in the sulfur pool, which is believed to be good for the skin. After having fun, the couple stops at a restaurant. Jenai worries because she has run out of film rolls for the camera, which would prevent them from capturing more moments. However, Riley reassures her that he brought plenty of film rolls from home, so they don't need to worry. Jenai then asks why Riley prefers using a vintage analog camera over a modern digital one. Riley explains that he wants to capture the moments as naturally as possible, which only an analog camera can do. In contrast, modern digital cameras have too many enhancements that make things look fake. They continue their journey and visit an old church, where a priest tells them about the history of the church. After visiting the church, they walk past large rocks, and Jenai poses in front of Riley, who quickly takes a picture of her. They both laugh happily and return to the group of tourists. Later, they admire colorful glass trinkets, and the stained glass windows remind Jenai of her father. Jenai shares that she grew up in a very religious environment, with her father being a pastor. Finally, they visit a beautiful waterfall where they both take in the stunning view and enjoy the serene surroundings. That night, after an exhausting day, they slept at the guest house. However, at 3 a.m., Jenai suddenly woke up. She peeked out of the window and saw the beautiful aurora lights in the sky, but suddenly a bright light covered the sky and disappeared in an instant. Jenai was left speechless and confused by what she saw. By 10 a.m., Jenai still hadn't woken up, as she had trouble sleeping all night. Riley struggled to wake her, but after a bit of persistence, she finally got up, and they both went to look for food. Riley was puzzled as to why the guest house didn't provide breakfast, which is usually expected. He went into another room, which was eerily quiet. With no other options, they decided to head out to find food elsewhere. However, when they reached the street, the town was strangely deserted, with cars parked along the road, but not a single person in sight, even though it was already 10 a.m. Riley tried to rationalize the situation, thinking perhaps the townspeople were celebrating some summer tradition like midsummer and had all gone beyond the mountains for the rituals. As they continued to walk through the town, calling out to people, there was no response, which made them even more anxious. They began entering supermarkets, but strangely, those too were empty, with no sign of anyone. They kept checking houses and tried calling several people, but still no one answered. Jenai also revealed that her mother, who was in America, wasn't answering her calls either. They aimlessly wandered through half of the town until they finally stopped to rest in an empty restaurant, exhausted and confused. Inside, Riley found a TV remote and hurried to turn on the television. The TV was showing reruns, but when Riley switched to live broadcasts, the signal abruptly disappeared. The few live broadcasts that remained only showed empty fields. Seeing this, they panicked and rushed outside. As they walked, Jenai opened her social media, but there were no new posts from anyone. The absence of activity made them feel even more isolated. They both returned to the guest house. Jenai tried sending voice notes to all her friends, hoping for a response, while Riley opened his laptop to check for news updates. The internet connection was working fine, but strangely, all online activity seemed frozen. News sites hadn't posted anything since the day before. Riley found it odd. If this were an internet issue, they wouldn't even be able to access social media, but everything was running smoothly. Riley then accessed a website that showed CCTV feeds from around the world. He checked the feed from Vatican City, which also appeared eerily empty. Despite this, they didn't give up. They quickly went back out to the street, inspecting one car after another. Eventually, they found one with the engine still running, so they used it to drive around the town. But the results were the same. Everywhere they went, the town remained deserted. They decided to leave the city and head to the countryside, but still, there were no signs of people anywhere. Upon arriving in another town, they began checking houses one by one. As they walked, Jenai expressed her belief that this might be the rapture, the end times event where, according to her faith, believers are taken up to heaven, leaving the lost behind in confusion. Riley, however, urged her to stay rational and keep searching for clues. As night fell, and with no sign of other people, they looked for a restaurant to rest for a while. Jenai continued trying to call her mother, but her efforts were in vain. Riley comforted her, reassuring her that the townspeople were likely beyond the eastern mountains and that they would head there tomorrow. Riley then expressed how grateful he was that they still had each other, promising that he would never leave her. Eventually, they returned to the guest house to sleep, though Riley chose to stay awake. The next morning, Jenai refused to get up, lying in bed and staring blankly. She still couldn't accept the reality of the situation, believing it was all a dream. This left Riley even more confused. He spent his time refreshing his social media, but again, there were no updates at all. Jenai then asked if they could go home, but Riley said it was impossible until they found someone who could help them cross the ocean. Nevertheless, Jenai insisted on going home, saying she didn't want to stay in unfamiliar places or out on the streets in such an uncertain situation. Her words prompted Riley to think of ways to help her come to terms with their circumstances. Riley went to the restaurant alone and brought back food for Jenai. Even though the meal was a mess, his effort managed to calm Jenai a little. Riley then took Jenai to a supermarket, where she hesitated to take any of the food. Riley, carrying a basket full of food, and take advantage of the situation. He suggested that they make the best of what was happening. Riley grabbed a new car and asked Jenai to pack their belongings from the guest house. When Jenai asked what he was planning, Riley replied that they were going home. They drove to an empty neighborhood where Riley announced that one of the houses would now be their home, so they no longer had to worry about a place to stay. This was their new home. Next, they went to a clothing store where Jenai finally began to come to terms with the situation. The two of them picked out clothes to their heart's content, behaving however they liked. They gleefully took stockpiles of food from the supermarket and visited various places, including a bar stocked with expensive drinks. They spent their days as if there were no problems in the world. One day, they stopped at a cafe where Riley prepared some coffee. However, Jenai began to feel uneasy and asked if this was some kind of punishment from God, meant specifically for them to repent. She wondered if this strange phenomenon had been orchestrated by God. Riley asked her what God's next plan was, and Jenai replied that, as humans, no one knows God's plans. After hearing her answer, Riley concluded that neither of them really knew. He told Jenai to stop blaming others, as they were the only ones living through this situation. Jenai then wondered what would happen next. Riley shared his theory that perhaps the townspeople had gone to the other side of the island to perform some sort of ritual and would eventually return. If not, then this world was theirs alone. As time passed, Jenai seemed to enjoy the situation, often venturing out alone without fear of any impending danger. Riley would then come to pick her up, as if they were pretending to live a normal life. They continued to explore beautiful places, including a hill where they stopped to take photos. Jenai excused herself to bathe in one of the pools nearby, and Riley followed her, taking pictures of her along the way. Seeing the fresh water and river, Riley joined her in the pool, and soon their intimacy led to making love at the spot. They both fell asleep afterward until the cold air woke Jenai, prompting her to get dressed. As she did, she noticed a vast, beautiful lavender field and began to enjoy herself there. Once again, Riley came along, capturing the moment with his analog camera. As days passed, they became more playful, reveling in the freedom they had never experienced before. While at the supermarket, Riley was fooling around with a shopping cart, which resulted in him falling and getting hurt. Fortunately, Jenai rushed over and tended to the bleeding on his arm. The incident made Jenai concerned about Riley's reckless behavior. Later that night, during a date, Jenai refused to drink, and they ended up arguing about it. Riley tried to reassure her that he was fine, but Jenai was upset, reminding him that there were no doctors or other people around to help them. She insisted that Riley shouldn't put himself in danger. It became clear that they had different outlooks on the situation. Riley wanted to make the most of this mysterious time, while Jenai urged them to live as normally as they had before. After the argument, Jenai went back to the house, leaving Riley to walk alone through the empty town, carrying a bouquet of flowers in his hand. When he arrived home, he found Jenai lying down and ready to open up about her feelings. Jenai began talking about a precious book she had left behind in America, a book given to her by her father. She used it to write down important things, such as the first time she admitted she loved Riley. She had written that moment in her book, and now she felt uneasy because she didn't have it with her. Riley smiled and told her that they already had everything they needed: the beautiful scenery, a place to live, and plenty of food. They could build anything they wanted. He asked her not to worry too much, assuring her they had it all. Despite Riley's optimism, Jenai responded that all she really wanted was to go home. The next day, they went on an adventure to visit important places, noticing that all the machines and facilities in the buildings were still running, but everything was deserted. Back at the house, Jenai discovered that the water tap was starting to malfunction. Riley seemed unconcerned and continued eating the food they had gathered. Jenai became angry, reminding him that most of the food was expired and they had agreed to ration what was left together. They didn't have a vegetable or fruit garden, and on top of that, the refrigerators were starting to break down, meaning the remaining meat would soon spoil. Riley told her not to panic, assuring her they could grow food and hunt later. Jenai became even more upset, explaining that they were in Iceland, where the soil was difficult to farm and animals were rare. She urged Riley to think more broadly and not underestimate the situation they were facing. Riley, annoyed, left his food unfinished. In the following days, they often went on separate outings, each doing what they wanted. Riley went to enjoy himself at a swimming pool, but he felt strange when he couldn't float in the water. Meanwhile, Jenai visited an iconic spot where she found a statue of a woman and began talking to it, wondering what had really happened to her. Jenai felt like she had been trapped in this isolated place with only one other person, believing it was some kind of test for her. Time passed, and the town remained empty, gradually becoming more disorganized. They continued exploring together until they reached the coast, where they found a beautiful cave and enjoyed their time near the beach. They climbed rocks, with Riley trying to cheer Jenai up by telling her legends about the place. However, Jenai seemed increasingly sad, desperately wanting to leave and cross the ocean to go home. Riley then took Jenai to an area where they found an abandoned airplane. He took pictures of the wreckage, calling it something beautiful, but Jenai angrily said that it symbolized death. Everywhere she went, she saw a world that had stopped and died, and she wanted Riley to acknowledge that reality. Riley responded that all he wanted was to see her happy, but Jenai retorted that he had never made her happy by hiding the truth from her. All she could think about was that everyone was gone, and there had been no word from their loved ones. Jenai asked Riley to stop lying to themselves about their feelings and then walked away. Riley, left alone, stared into the vast emptiness, feeling sorrowful. As night approached, he chose to sleep inside the wrecked airplane. Feeling sorry for him, Jenai eventually returned to him. The next morning, when they woke up, they silently grew closer to one another. Without saying a word, they returned home together, although they remained quiet. Riley often went out on his own, taking pictures of the landscapes along the roadside. However, when he photographed a painting of a face, he felt a sense of despair and ended up throwing away all the film from his camera. He felt that everything he was doing was pointless, believing that Jenai no longer liked him. Meanwhile, Jenai spent her time at home, using Riley's laptop to continue searching for answers. She accidentally came across old emails between the two of them and listened to a past voice note, smiling as she remembered those moments. On the other hand, Riley tried to find other ways to make Jenai happy. He went to a hardware store to look for materials he could use for farming and building a power generator. While taking the elevator, Riley realized that the door was stuck, causing him to panic as he tried to force it open. Thankfully, he managed to get the door open, and relief washed over him. When Riley returned home, he looked for Jenai, but found she had gone out alone. Riley then gathered his materials and began working on building a watermill, although he wasn't sure if it would work. Nevertheless, he hoped it would bring a bit of joy to his girlfriend. Meanwhile, Jenai ventured to a place where she found a horse. She approached it, feeling a surge of happiness. Moments later, the horse led her to a spot where a colony of horses roamed freely, and the sight filled Jenai with joy. As time passed, their relationship improved. Jenai brought Riley to a place she had wanted to visit, and they arrived at a glacier tourist spot. They had fun together, with Riley once again using his camera to capture their moments. During this time, Jenai expressed the need for a safe place where they could begin to rebuild humanity. Riley responded that he would search for one soon so they could start a new life. The two of them sat together, sharing a tender moment as they enjoyed the breathtaking glacier view. They returned to the city and noticed how the environment had become dusty and filled with a foul smell. Jenai entered a flower shop and felt sad upon seeing the dried-up flowers. Riley comforted her, suggesting they search for flowers elsewhere. While on the way, Riley mentioned that the city was no longer a welcoming place for them. The advanced equipment and systems were starting to fail, meaning they had no choice but to find a place where they could live a more traditional lifestyle. They headed toward the hills, hoping to find a village. Riley noticed some neatly arranged trees and suggested they explore the area. Sure enough, they discovered a wooden house that appeared to be well maintained. The house was very traditional and seemed perfect for managing natural resources. As they explored, an old man suddenly appeared carrying firewood. Riley approached him, though the old man seemed scared at first. Fortunately, he spoke English so they could communicate. The old man introduced himself as Niels, and it was clear that he was starving and in poor health. Riley immediately took him inside and gave him food. They began to talk, and Niels explained that he had left the city after people disappeared. Niels believed he needed to repent, choosing to live in solitude in his cabin. He had even prepared his own grave ready to die. Riley encouraged Niels to live with them and hold out hope for finding other survivors. However, Niels refused, insisting that he was following whatever plan God had for him. His response frustrated Riley, who was becoming increasingly upset by Niels's hopeless and resigned attitude. That night, Jenai couldn't sleep. Niels approached her and asked more about her experiences. Jenai shared that she had come to this place for a vacation, but now she was heartbroken because her loved ones had suddenly disappeared. Niels then shared a story from his past. When he was young, he had left his family for a long time to work as a fisherman. When he returned, he found that his family had changed. His children had grown up and his wife no longer wanted to acknowledge him. He became a stranger to his own family, so he built another house to live in isolation. But now, with everyone gone, all he could do was wait for his own death, hoping to reunite with his family in the afterlife. Jenai asked why God had abandoned him, especially since he was a man of faith. She felt that God had been unfair to him. Niels responded that he didn't know if this situation was related to the end times or something similar, but he believed that, in the end, everything would return to God. The next day, Riley woke Jenai and informed her that Niels had passed away. Together, they buried him at a nearby burial site. Suddenly, Jenai questioned the purpose of burying the man, expressing that performing or skipping this ritual ultimately made no difference, as they would all face the same fate. Riley insisted that they simply needed to treat him with humanity and respect. However, Jenai disagreed, certain that there were still other people alive, and that this entire situation could be explained rationally, without God's involvement. Riley was confused by Jenai's sudden change in perspective. After their encounter with Niels, Jenai became determined to continue searching for answers. She wanted to prove that this wasn't a curse from God. She even ventured around the city alone, marking every empty house and preparing a map for her quest. Seeing this, Riley followed her, trying to persuade her that they didn't need to do all this. He urged them to focus on building a new life and forget the past. But Jenai snapped at him, declaring that she would keep searching until she found a reasonable explanation. She believed there was no mystery or miracle in the world and that everything had a logical answer. Riley responded that it didn't matter if the situation didn't make sense. The important thing was that they were still alive and the future was in their hands. Hearing this, Jenai agreed to return home, where she continued her research on the laptop, while Riley focused on constructing a traditional power generator to support their needs. They went to a river, where Riley explained that the water flowed from the glacier they had visited the previous day. The water would eventually freeze again, completing a continuous cycle. Riley was trying to imply that life would continue as long as there was a place that supported it. Even though everyone else had disappeared, they were still here, and they needed to survive no matter what the reason was. The next day, they carried on with their routine, though Jenai remained anxious about what was truly happening. Her laptop suddenly received a message notification, and she eagerly opened it, only to find that the message was from Riley, inviting her to watch the aurora. Disappointed, Jenai felt a deep sense of hopelessness, convinced that she truly was the last person alive, a thought she believed was a curse. Riley, in her eyes, never seemed to understand her feelings. He saw the situation as an opportunity to enjoy, while Jenai viewed it as a curse. The next day, Riley woke up to find a package on the kitchen table with his name written on it. He went to the kitchen and turned on the water pump he had assembled. While turning on the faucet, Riley opened the package and discovered that the photos from the previous day had been printed by Jenai. However, he grew suspicious when he noticed Jenai's favorite sweater lying on the lawn. Panic set in as Riley looked at the photos again, realizing they only showed Jenai posing alone without him. He hurried to search for Jenai, retracing their steps to the places they had previously visited. Eventually, Riley found his vehicle at the location where they had gone swimming in the mountains. He ran to the pool and discovered that Jenai had submerged herself. He pulled her out of the water, crying as he cradled her. After realizing that Jenai was dead, Riley contemplated drowning himself to end his life as well, but he ultimately cancelled that plan. Instead, he lifted Jenai's body, hoping he could revive her, but despair washed over him. He kissed her goodbye and then left her body without burying it. Riley recalled Jenai's earlier message that this mysterious event could surely be explained, and it was his duty to find the cause. As he drove his car, he resolved to continue surviving and to uncover the truth that his beloved had desired, even though it was all too late. And that's it for the story series of this film. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support this channel by subscribe, like and share. See you in the next video. Goodbye.